It's about to start. It's recording. Yep, go for it.
Welcome, everyone. It is the Feast of St. Joseph today, 19th of March. We'll start the proceedings with a prayer. It's a prayer drafted by Pope Francis to announce that this year would be the year of St. Joseph. The prayer is, Hail, Guardian of the Redeemer, Spouse of the Blessed Virgin Mary. To you, God entrusted his only Son. In you, Mary placed her trust. With you, Christ became man. Blessed Joseph, to us too, show us yourself a father and guide us in the path of life. Obtain for us grace, mercy and courage, and defend us from every evil. Amen. Well, it's a pretty important day, quite apart from the feast day. Because the long journey that Stefan has taken over many years has come to fruition. It might not be the only fruit of his labours over the years, but it will be a significant day in his academic and commitment to his academic life and his commitment to the cause espoused by Cardine over the past century and more. Now, a few words just about Stefan. Some of us have forgotten just how his path has wound its way to the current. Stefan is a graduate in law from the University of Melbourne. He graduated in 1978. And for the next 5 years or so worked for the Australian YCW in different capacities. He then moved to Belgium and he worked in Europe in a number of positions. He also worked in Asia for the YCW and returned to Australia in about 2006. And he did a variety of work in Australia, including pastoral work in a parish, and worked as an editor and translator for La Croix International and as a journalist editor for Cath News and related publications. He has managed to pick up a number of qualifications on the way, including a Master's in Legal Theory, a Master's in Canon Law, and more recently, as we all know, a PhD from the University of Divinity in Melbourne. It's a terrific CV that he's got, and I think if you want to know more about it, Stefan will give you modestly give you the CV. But one thing that stands out is that his commitment to Cardine and understanding Cardine and promoting Cardine has not only been a labour of love, but it's been a labour of commitment. So it's a very important night for Stefan. Just before passing over to Greg, I would like to record that John Maguire is one of our participants, and John, as some of you know, perhaps most of you know, was chaplain to the lay auditors at Vatican II. Which is a pretty important role. And those of you who have seen his video clip on the Cardine website will know just how close he was to the events of Vatican II. So welcome, John, and also welcome Don O'Brien, who's with John in Brisbane. Also in Brisbane is Greg Crafter. Greg's normally in Adelaide. Greg has worked for the YCW, as a young man, and both boy and man, as they say, he's been committed to Cardine, and he is a very appropriate person to launch this book. So over to you, Greg, and then we'll pass on to Bruce Duncan after you. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks very much, Brian. And can I acknowledge you, Stefan, and your family? I think the recording will go to Helen when she is available, currently in Malaysia, and to your children. And can I also acknowledge Father Bruce Duncan, your supervisor, obviously lived through this PhD thesis with you, and friends and colleagues from around the world. It's wonderful that we can gather in this way. Unfortunately, COVID has meant that we can't, at least the Australians can't gather in person and celebrate in a more traditional way this achievement, but we can gather in this way, which is also a very effective way to celebrate this occasion. This is an important occasion, and certainly cause for celebration. It is a very important publication, and it will have, I think, a very important role to play in the development of the role of the laity in the church, but a deeper understanding of the Joseph movement and the Cardine way of deep formation of the laity. I read this book and it brought back many memories to me. The YCW and the formation that I was fortunate enough to receive has served me every day of my life since that time. It's got me into a lot of trouble as well. It took me into politics, no easy journey. I spent almost 15 years as a member of my state parliament and 11 years as a minister. It took me into the international field when I chaired the International Baccalaureate Organisation out of Geneva, and many church and civic roles that I've played over these 60 years since I first joined the YCW. So my comments tonight are personal and perhaps emotional, and Bruce has, in his very masterly way, in his foreword to the book and the comments that he'll make to us tonight as well, has given that deep analysis of this publication. But I just want to say that one of the reasons why this book is important is because there is so little written of this quality and this depth about the philosophy and the theology that gave the evolution that gave to the rise of the Joseph movement and all those organisations that flowed from that. We're an organisation of young workers, so we weren't the book writing genre. Many of us have had the good fortune to go on to study further in our lives, and perhaps we also have time at this stage to write as well. But I would have loved to have had this book when I was a full-time YCW worker, particularly in dealing with bishops and priests, and many of whom were reluctant to give a role to the laity in their dioceses or in their parishes, and to have that depth of knowledge of Cardine's, the influences on him, his thinking, and that period of the Vatican Council, such an important time of change in the life of the church globally, here in Australia in particular, and to know a lot more about that period as this book explains. It helps us to understand the church as well and how it makes decisions and who makes decisions in the church. I ask myself, why don't we have more books? I look at some of the Australian chaplains, brilliant people. Brian Burke became the international chaplain of the YCW. Kevin Smith, Paul Willey, Jim Nippard, Frank Hornby, Frank Purcell, Bob Wilkinson in Adelaide, Charlie Mayne, rector of the seminary in Melbourne for many years, all capable of writing. They did write a lot, but not books, not this sort of depth of learning. And it's a period that we've missed that opportunity to a large extent. And these documented testimonies, analysis, research of the scarce basic material that there is available to us is so important. And as we now have to fight again, as we did in the Vatican Council, to establish the role of the laity in the church and in the broader community and access that deep formation that I want to say something about as well. But Cardine, remember, was born in 1882, and we are well aware of his early years and his seminary training. But the Vatican Council came, and he was in his 80s at that time, and played a role in the preparatory work for the council, played a role during the council, and then was made cardinal at the very end of the council, and in that final year played an important role as a participant in the council, but then died 18 months later. So this book, in a way, is a testimony to the period at the end of his life and a testimony to his life's work. But the book is much more than that, and more than about the council. It's an analysis of the forces that applied in developing an opportunity for the formation of the laity, and the role. The word proper appears in Stephen's book on many occasions, the proper role of the laity in the life of the church. And what is it that drove you, Stephen, to write this book, to stick at it, to do this research? A great sacrifice to you and to your family, obviously. And you said Cardine's life, it was the gulf in the perception of Cardine's role at Vatican II between those who knew and worked with him and council historians that provides the subject matter of this book, which is based on your PhD thesis. And so clearly you wanted to set the record straight and provide that empirical evidence, that evidentiary base for an analysis of that fundamentally important role that not just Cardine, but those in his camaraderie group of bishops and cardinals and advisors that had so much influence in the council. And one does need an internal driving force to take on a PhD of this type. The research, the original material, to gather that together and to put it into a sequence and an order to tell that story is so important, yet so difficult, we know, to achieve. So this book is important for the insight into the workings of Vatican II and how discussions took place and who made decisions. In a sense, a group of elderly men, if you look at it objectively, mostly Italian at that time, many of whom were ensconced in offices in the Vatican, had superior advantage in terms of being organised and had agendas and had access to research and so on, that researchers and so on. No women, of course, in the decision-making process, no youth. But fortunately, a good number of people who participated in advocacy roles prior to and during the council. It's interesting, the language of the council was Latin. And in Adelaide, my own archdiocese, Archbishop Beovich and Archbishop Gleeson, who attended the council, came back. And when they came back, they would have a series of lectures in the cathedral on the sessions. And one night, Archbishop Gleeson was talking about the language of the council being Latin. And he said that he was saying his breviary in the Vatican gardens. And he just paused for a moment, and there were two cardinals having an animated conversation in Latin. He said there was an American cardinal, and he was talking about growing oranges in California. And there was an Italian cardinal who was engaged in this conversation, but he was actually talking about mixed marriages. And so you wonder about the language of the council and how great the dialogue was and the understanding, collaboration. So be it. In reality, there were probably very few of those crucial members of the council who were organised and were formed groups that could actually influence the council, come from disparate parts of the world up against those blocks. And so it was important that Cardine, who did have that influence and was able to group people together and have an agenda that could be explained and developed and gather others towards him. People like Hilda Kamara, who really had a transformation during the council as well, and then become a great advocate for Cardine to become elected as a cardinal. And Stephen provides that objective, factual, and fulsome analysis of Cardine's role and that influence during the council, which is such a valuable insight. Those decrees on the lay apostolate, the pastoral constitution of the church in the modern world, or the contemporary world, as it's often said, such fundamental documents that we live by and held on to in those years after Vatican II. But most important, there are key words and references in almost all of the documents that came out of that council, the 16 documents, on the role of the laity and their status in the church. A remarkable achievement from where the council started to where it finished. Reminds me of the joke at the time of the Vatican Council in church circles of one of the key cardinals in Rome who jumped in a taxi and said to the driver, he was a conservative from the Curia, and the taxi driver recognised him. He said, "Take me to the council, taxi driver." And the cardinal promptly went to sleep, and half an hour later he woke up and he was on the Autostrada heading to the north of Italy. And he said, "Man, where are you taking me? Where are you taking me?" And the taxi driver turned around and said, "Trent." And so there were many influences in that Second Vatican Council. We may despair today that all of the promise and hope that Vatican Council presented to us and provided has disappeared, something like a snowflake falling on hot asphalt, as they say, but maybe not. And this period of Pope Francis, I think, has revived almost single-handedly the spirit of Cardine and the Joseph's movements, and in documents that he constantly is producing, these exhortations. They're written beautifully in a different language, easy to read. You don't wait for translations any longer. They're out there. And Laudato Si, so on. The Joy of the Gospels, I think, is a superb document in itself. In the Joy of the Gospels, he said, the majority of people in the church are lay people. The minority are those in ordained ministry. And he said the job of those in ordained ministry is to serve the laity. And then somehow we've got that out of kilter a little bit, clericalism and so on, that he rails against in so much of what he says. And he goes on to say that the laity have got a right to access formation, deep formation, and it's a duty of the church to provide that. And he said in too many churches, they've closed the door to the laity, and he calls that clericalism. And we know what he's saying about that. He says the reason why it's important that the laity are able to access that formation is not simply to serve the church, but indeed to transform the world around us. And it seems to me that those words are just so fundamentally important and very much the spirit of what we were given in our own privileged formation that we received as activists in the Young Christian Workers Movement as Josephs. And so let us briefly, in these few moments that I've got, provide you with some reflections that on this book that just struck me as so important. And my mind just kept going back to my own period, particularly as a full-time worker, my work as a branch president, as a diocesan leader, and all of those years since then. Firstly, the importance of the YCW in providing a structure required for formation, a program for meetings, and those constant elements of preparation for meetings. Cardine was always a person, as we read in Stephen's writings, for preparation, for being thorough in what we were wanting to do. He was always early for meetings as well. But the gospel reflection, the review of life, the personal inquiry, social action, the social inquiry, and the prayers before and at the end of our meetings. And Stefan, throughout his book, talks about the trinominals and the binominals, those slogans, if you like, that Cardine, we just live those and they're entrenched in our minds. See, judge and act, the three truths, conscience, responsibility. Always by the layperson, but never without the priest. Do it yourself, do it with others, let them do it. Formation through action and so on. There are dozens of those slogans that we learned, so valuable and of lifelong value to each of us. We were taught how to speak in public, how to chair meetings, to take minutes, to advocate on behalf of others, very practical things that we would not have had the opportunity to gather otherwise. Our leadership was educative, it was formative, it was helped us to be reflective people, to develop inquiring minds, to give us a spiritual awakening and an awareness raising experience. Secondly, the overall organisation took us from a parish to a diocesan involvement, a broadening of our vision from diocesan to national, from national to international. And members in branches were part of that. They got a sense of belonging to a greater being, a diocese or to a national and international movement. And there's something very powerful about that, opening up of the world, a deeper understanding of the human condition, an international mindedness, being part of a global chain of activity, and extension workers, those from Australia. And we have Ellen Smitty with us tonight, Ellen Mills, Peter Shanley, those others who gave so much to us back here in our homeland, but it did such great work globally as well. The sense of being responsible for the organisation itself, and because of that, a raised consciousness. An organisation that was Catholic, it was Christian, and it was closely linked to the sacraments, the clergy, and our bishops. And then the role of formators. In our day, it was mostly ordained priests who were our chaplains. And the theme of this book is about lay formation, the formation of the laity, so that we may take our rightful, just and proper place in the church and be the leaven, the salt in the earth and in the world around us. Cardine lived this role, the role model of the chaplain, as did thousands of others. But today we really struggle to find those formators. And the work that I've been involved in our Catholic education system in our schools to try and engage more teachers as formators and student leaders also as formators, and those in our universities and training centres. Then there's the issue of the ability to understand and to read and to study encyclicals and Catholic social teaching. Brian Lawrence has prepared a very important paper that he gave in Rome some years ago on Rerum Novarum and the encyclicals that have followed in sequence on milestone years and following Catholic social teaching in that way. And that is something I think is so fundamentally important in our understanding of the church and the church in the modern world and how we may play our role in it. Cardine and the popes and the bishops. Stefan mentioned in his book a conversation with Ron Mayoni, and Stefan might have been at a meeting, a reunion in Brussels a few years ago, where we were sitting talking to Ron Mayoni, and he told a story of when Cardine had a habit of, as soon as a pope was elected, he'd go straight to Rome and advocate for the mandate for the YCW and for the Joseph's movements. And John had been elected. He had not met John, and he went down there. He was early for the meeting. I think it was 2:30 in the afternoon. Ron was with him, and Cardine said, "Look, I don't think he'll see us. He's very busy. He's just been elected. We probably won't see him." Rom said, look, we'll try. And we waited. So 2:30 came and the Pope didn't come, and 2:45 and nearly 3 o'clock. And Cardine said, look, we'll go. You know, he's not going to see us. Rom said, just sit. And then next minute there were some footsteps down the passageway, and who came but the Pope himself. And he said to Cardine, I had to become a Pope to meet you. And he said, what can I do for you? And Cardine had a list in his pocket, and he pulled it out and asked for a whole series of things to happen, and they did. And of course, he mentioned there with him that he wanted to open up the church, and the Vatican Council was his great contribution to the life of the church. We exist as lay people and within lay organisations in a hierarchical church. It is still basically in modern society an archaic institution, the church itself. It has huge power and authority vested in Rome and in the bishops, and the laity are very much at the mercy of the administration of that power and authority. And in the last few generations, it's pretty clear that the role of the laity has been restricted very much in the life of the church, particularly the role of women, religious women in particular, young people, young families, and the rise of the church bureaucrats has become very powerful indeed. The centralisation of effort and influence within diocesan offices, church offices and so on, rather than out into the parishes and into the broader church. We're seeing a loss of authority, I think, at the national level, whether it's in education or health or welfare, and even in the Bishops' Conference itself, where they've been very much engaged in cutting a lot of the roles that they play. And these are all of great concern. And then I just wanted to conclude by saying something about the plenary council, because I think if we didn't talk about action in the future, we wouldn't be true Josephs. And so we have in Australia, as in there are in many countries, this call for a synodal church, a church that gathers people together, and the decision making is diffused much more than it currently is. And in a sense, in our country, it mirrors Vatican II. There is very little role for the laity in this plenary. There are statutory provisions for bishops and vicars general and religious leaders and so on, and then just a number of positions for the laity. And in order to get women involved in the plenary and young people, many people who would traditionally have that deep formation have not been able to be present around the table. But there is important preparatory work that's been going on now for a couple of years. And lobbying, of course, has been going on particular matters. But the reality is that those very conservative and fundamentalist groups in our church here and obviously elsewhere are very well resourced. They wield substantial influence, and they have already in the working groups and the papers that are being prepared. And they have global connections. And so the task is the one that faced Cardine in preparing for Vatican II. It's the same challenge we face here. But of course, we always rely on the Holy Spirit, and he was certainly present in Vatican II, and we would hope that the Holy Spirit be with us in this plenary that's coming up later this year. I prepared a paper that I think is on the Cardine Institute website, or referred to it there, where I set out a whole series of matters that the plenary could take into account in developing policies and infrastructure for the formation of the laity in this country. And that network of centres that we had once have disappeared and gone, and how we restructure that again and give the laity that opportunity for deep formation that as the Pope said, is their right and is the duty of the Church to provide. So just in conclusion, can I just say again, thank you, Stefan, and your family for what you have given to us and to the laity of the world, and it's reflected by this wonderful gathering of people from around the world tonight, and many others that will pick up your book one way or another and read it and enjoy it and be inspired by it and by that spirit of Cardine. I look forward to what Bruce has to say now and his wonderful insight as your supervisor into this piece of research and original writing and the story that you've told. So congratulations. Thank you.
Is that for me to go now? Please interrupt if I'm cutting across anyone. Greg, that was just wonderful, your summary and evaluation of thesis and Stefan's work. You might think my eyes are bloodshot, and that's because of how many drafts of Stefan's thesis I've read over the last few years. Stefan, I can't remember how long we were going at this, but it seemed a long time. We finally got there. And if you think this version of his book is long, well, the original was twice as long. and then Stefan had to face an enormous task of cutting it down to a length that the university would accept. So, Stefan, I take my hat off to you. I don't know how you've done it, but your doggedness in pursuing this and your enthusiasm and your expertise in doing this, I've just been astonished at your level of scholarship, your thoroughness in doing research. I don't know if everybody knows how well you speak French. Can you get? I think you can get by in Italian as well, and the trips to Europe and going through archives has been just astonishing. And you chased up all the people who actually knew Cardine who are still alive. So you're zipping around the world interviewing these old characters and cardinals and so on who were influential at the Vatican Council before they stepped through the pearly gates. I think this is a contribution to scholarship which will be long remembered. Had you not done it, a lot of this would have been lost. And then to gather all the material you can of Cardine, put it on the net and make it available for other people is a service to scholars everywhere. And so I think it's not just a reinterpretation of Vatican II that you're offering here, but I think it's a key to the pontificate of Pope Francis. Because as you rightly point out in all your depths of scholarship, going through the origins, the background to Cardine's thinking, the various ones, the history behind it. And Cardine didn't just invent these things himself. He came out of a whole background of 100 years longer of a struggle and thinking and work by others to try to, how do we negotiate this period of modernity we're moving into? What does the faith have to say to this? How do we bring it all alive? What does it mean to be a Christian in this time? So, but I think the genius of Cardine was, first he was able to navigate his way through all the clerical politics to protect the YCW from people who are opposed to him, and some strongly were, because of his emphasis on lay activism and so on. He's not only navigated, but he's been able to do it in a way which ordinary working boys and girls, remember he was working, started with the girls, young girls, I don't know how old they were, 15, 16, maybe even younger, some of them. But this is where he started. And I think he learned as he went along what really engaged these people, what fired them up. And it's such an experimental method. So what Pope Francis is looking for here, and those of you who have been following his documents will realize how closely he follows the See Judge Act methodology. Now, we talk about the See Judge Act, that's a sort of shorthand way, and of course there are many other more sophisticated versions of social analysis and so on. But this is a way which is, it's everybody can do it. You don't have to be academic, you don't have to be a genius, you just have to learn how to reflect on your experience, learn how to share it with others, learn how to listen to others. And out of this process, in a prayerful context, Francis talks about it in terms of discernment, of course, using the Jesuit term, but we've always done discernment. This is, but we haven't done such a context before, which is engaging with the wider social issues around us, the everyday issues that people, young workers were dealing with in their homes and factories and so on. Well, you're all very familiar with that. But I think it's Pope Francis which has really surprised us. And he came upon this a little bit late, I think. But it was really, he was a great admirer of Camara and some of the other people who had really absorbed Cardine's message. And of course, the methodology of the YCW was very widespread in Latin America and all the church groups, and it was big influence on liberation theology, various versions of liberation theology. And then the whole church in Latin America, every 10 years, they all came together for a big continental Latin American conference of where they had to go, starting with Medellin, 68, and then culminating in Aparecida in 2007, where Bergoglio, Pope Francis, was the one who pulled it all together with his writing group. And so, I don't know what you thought when he became Pope, but I thought this poor man, fancy electing man from Argentina, you know nothing about world politics, hasn't got these sort of skills and background and expertise. Well, didn't he prove us all wrong? Because all this period, he's been involved in the dirty war in Argentina. He's been involved with skill. How do you reconcile people in a situation of conflict in the church and in the wider society? He's been involved with the big financial issues. Argentina has what was it, 2001, the biggest financial sovereign debt default in history till that time. So the country was impoverished, and so all those things are things that he's been experienced with. But so the point about what I'm saying here is that he takes very much to heart the sort of emphasis that Cardine and Camara that was alive in the groups that he was working with. And now I think what he's trying to do, he wants the whole church through what you were saying, Greg, about the synodality. I think this is a process of See Judge Act for the whole church, in which he wants to move away from the earlier hierarchical, clerical structure as a method of empowerment for all people, just as the YCW method is. It's not just a matter of, working out what to do in this, but it's an empowerment for life. Once the skills you learn in those sort of groups, they last you for life. As Greg, you were saying, all the people that came out of the YCW movements, you people and people what an extraordinary influence that has had. So I'm getting a little bit carried away here, but Stefan, I think what you're doing is supplying a key for how to interpret what Pope Francis is doing. What he's doing is trying to get the whole church to participate more actively in this engagement with the social and cultural realities around us in an active way, to empower people to take decisions, to take action. And Greg, you're quite right. The two words that keep recurring in Pope Francis: consciousness of our social situation and responsibility. There are two key words. They're action words. They're consciousness leading to action. And that's what he's keeping reiterating for the synod. That's what we need to do now. Look at our situation, go to the peripheries. Have we built a giant institution which is rolling along by itself? And what's happened to the little people? What's happening to the margins? So all this process of engagement, synodality, plenary council, it's all about how faith relates to modern living. So Stefan, I could go on. There's a lot to think about here. But I'd just like to congratulate you on what you've done. I'm so pleased to see you getting it into at least an ebook. And I hope soon that you'll be able to get it published, because I think this needs to go into libraries. And I think there's going to be a great deal of interest internationally in this. It's such a thorough work. I can't think of anything else that can add to it within the scope of what you've done. And it'll last for years as the standard work in this field. So that's all I think I can say. I'm very conscious of the cost to you personally, and to your family too. They've made a big sacrifice with you in the pursuit of this, and but I think it will bear great fruit in the future. So Greg and everybody, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Bruce and Greg. Maybe I can just say a couple of words. I've had my 100,000 words to say. Yeah, look, when you start a thesis, you don't really know where to go. And I wasn't sure which university to go to or which professor to go to. But I can tell you in one sentence why I asked Bruce to be my supervisor. It's because when I went to see him, he told me immediately, he said, "You found a gold mine." And I think he's certainly been proved right over the years of my research. And so, yeah, thanks very much, Bruce, not only for your recognition of what a treasure trove it is, but also for your patience and follow through. And yes, as you said, reading through all those drafts and shortening the book and everything else. So, yeah, I'm really happy and much appreciated for all that. Greg, thanks very much also for your very kind words. Yeah, look, one thing that struck me while you were talking, like if you want to summarize my book in one paragraph or one sentence, you can summarize it in, as Cardine did himself. He said it was the Joseph bishops and who kind of did everything. And there were 230 of them whose names I now have. I believe there were probably more who had been either YCW chaplains or YCS chaplains or one of the other specialized Catholic action movements. That's nearly 10% of the members of the count, the 2,500 odd bishops that were at the council. And just listen to the way Greg spoke there, the formation that he got that enabled him to become a leader, a politician. And those bishops there, they had that formation. They were giving that formation to young workers and students and farmers back in their home countries. And they had all that network that Greg also mentioned, from the local parishes to diocese, national, international level. And you think back in the 60s, who had that network? Nobody. accept, you know, our movements. It's just astonishing the way I've always marveled how the YCW spread from Belgium to 50 countries by the time World War II broke out. You know, how did it happen? Well, actually, there's one simple, many answers, but one simple answer is the fantastic publications that Cardine produced even before the age of the internet, which people are able to copy and work with in their own countries. And that's how Cardine influenced a whole generation of priests who actually founded the YCW in so many of those countries. And you have to give credit to Pius XI, and also John the 23rd, because they thought Catholic action was important enough that they went out looking for the priests who were involved in that to make them bishops. And there they were in 1962 at Vatican II. And on October the 11th, so many of them, they already knew each other. You know, they just got organised. They didn't have an SJ after their name or an OP or an OMI. They weren't wearing a badge, but they had that formation from the Joseph's movements. And that really was the whole key. And, you know, that's the whole book, really, what they did and how that, and on the basis of that formation. So, you know, I don't really want to say much more than that. I would like to just show you the book if I could. Oh, I do want to recognise a couple of people here. I'd also like to thank particularly Professor Jean-Paul Durand, Dominican from Paris, lived with Congar and Chanou and all these guys. He was a YCS leader in France before he joined the Dominicans. And he also encouraged me in my research back in 1993 when I was studying canon law. I didn't even want to study canon law, actually, but another friend of mine sent Antoine Sondag, who just died a couple of months ago, sadly. Antoine sent me to see Jean-Paul Durand, and I hadn't even decided. And Jean-Paul starts filling out the form for me, you know, and I thought, well, that's the Holy Spirit speaking. And then he was the one that encouraged me at the start. I wrote 200 pages I was trying to explain why the YCW had problems with the church. And I thought, no, I haven't really explained anything. So with his encouragement, he encouraged me to go to the origins of the YCW. And that's how I got into this Aladdin's cave, you know, of Le Sillon and La Monnaie and all these places where the YCW came from. So my apologies, Jean-Paul, I never got to do my doctorate in canon law, but this is what came out of your encouragement. I'd also like to say hello to Eric Mahieu. Eric's in Rome today. He is the world scholar on Congar. You all know Congar was a big man at Vatican II. Eric edited Congar's council notes back 20 years ago. There's an English translation published by, here in Australia actually, by ATF Press, Hilary Regan's fantastic work. So I'd just like to say good day to Eric and congratulations for all you've done, and so many things to discuss. And many others of you I can see there, really happy to be with you. Jean-Marie Dumortier, met him in South Africa after Mandela was released, and Dominique Laxag. If you want to know what the Sion was, talk to Dominique. She is the person who, in today's world, really embodies the spirit and has that knowledge, historical knowledge, but also the spirit of the Sion movement of Marc Sanier. And anyway, there's so many people to thank, so you'll just have to read the acknowledgement at the start of my book. But, you know, I hope you do read the book, so I better show you where to read it and download it. Yeah, as Bruce said, it's an e-book right now. You know, actually, I actually prefer an e-book, but people say it's important to have a print book. But anyway, whatever. If you look in the chat now, you can see where the link is, www.theleaven.com.au. Some Catholic newspaper in the US has got theleaven.com, so you have to add AU on the end. But look, if you don't mind, I'll just share my screen with you to show you the website where the book is, and you can sort of find your way around it. Nope. And you'll be able to see yourselves there for a second, but I'm going to show you the website. So you can see the website there, the front page. Basically, I've got on the menu across the top, I've got the different sections of the book, and you've got the contents along the right-hand side. Of course, I'm not going to take you through that all right now, but I just want to point out that there's also a lot of other resources here as well. For example, the videos. I think Greg, Greg mentioned John Maguire. Fantastic videos with John, his day that when he was there with Cardine, when he's got his red hat. Francois Hutat. Now, who knows this story? Francois was a Belgian sociologist and a self-admitted avowed Marxist, you know, but he wrote the first draft of the introduction to Gaudium and Spes on the situation of people in the world today. So there you go. Who knows that that the introduction to Gaudium and Spes was written by a Marxist. By the way, it was Francois also who took a young priest from Poland around Belgium to visit the coal mines and factories. His name was Karol Wojtyła. They became friends in 1947, saw each other on their summer holidays, were friends at Vatican II. And Karol Wojtyła at the council as an archbishop in Krakow congratulated Francois for the first draft that he'd made of the situation of the world today. So very interesting to see. We all think of John Paul II as an anti-Marxist or an anti-communist, but he was a very good friend of Francois Hutat as well. So it was fantastic talking to some of these people. I've got more videos. Slowly I'll post them up there. But it's been a great privilege to work on this whole book. And anyway, I've given you where the website is. There's the download page there. You just go there and click it in various formats. I don't think I really have to explain that now, but eventually here you can see PDF, EPUB, whatever you like to do, whatever suits your computer or your tablet or a phone, whatever you prefer. Now I've got to figure out how I can get out of this sharing the screen too. Yeah, how do I get out of the screen sharing? Yeah, we had this problem at the start. Reading controls, stop share. So here we are back again. Yeah. So anyway, that's really enough for me to say. I just want to say thanks to everybody, and I should also say welcome all your feedback. It's an ebook now. That's the positive, and it's very easy to change and correct and eliminate as many errors as I can, or rethink paragraphs or pages. So yeah, I really welcome all your feedback to help try and improve it. And so hopefully by the time we do get to turning it into a print publication, maybe next year for the 60th anniversary of the opening of Vatican II, it'll be able to stand further criticism. So thanks very much to everybody. I'll hand over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Stefan. This has been a very interesting event. Obviously, we've been privileged to have contributions from Greg Crafter and Bruce Duncan. If you were to choose the leading ex-YCW activist in the real world, I think you would have to put Greg at the top of the list. He's been a great contributor over the years. He was shaped and formed by the YCW, and throughout his many endeavours over the years has been a great testament to the capacity of the YCW. Bruce Duncan has been a terrific contributor in the generation of ideas, of telling the history, of communicating the values of the YCW movement and associated movements within the church, and particularly in relation to social justice. So Bruce's publications and his advocacy over the years has been very important. So with Greg and Bruce, it's been a great night. And of course, for Stefan, it's been, as I said before, the fulfilment of much work that he's done over the years, his commitment to Cardine and to all that Cardine stood for. So it's been a great night. Thank you very much to Greg and Bruce. Thanks to you, Stefan, for all of your work, and congratulations on this. And could you perhaps conclude the proceedings tonight, Stefan?
Yeah, actually, I've just seen somebody's got their hand up. Actually, it's John Maguire, the participant at Vatican II, would like to say a few words. John, very happy to hear from you.
We'll leave it to you.
All I wanted to say is the Vatican Council, there were two statements that really set the moment. The Pope, when he opened it, where he said that there was a difference between what is faith and the doctrines of faith. and that the doctrines have to be constantly rewritten or rediscovered or re-expressed. The other one was the man who was the Patriarch Maximus Psyche of Antioch. And when he got up to speak, he said he was the successor of St. Peter before there were any Christians in Rome. In other words, he was putting himself on an equal level with the Pope, at least. And one of the things he said, the difference between the Antiochian Church and the Roman Church was that we in Antioch believe we have to begin with the God of creation. And only then, after we've really listened and found out what God is saying through creation, then to listen to what the church might have to say about it, or what Christ might add to it. I just feel we're listening to the church first, still in tonight's discussion. The thing about the Antiochian Church, you've got to start with the God of creation. What does each human being say? Not what does the church say, not what does the priest say, and the same thing with priests. They should not be, they've been trained to a set of answers coming from Constantine's day. They've got to go back to being human beings. That you're not a human being fully until you have come to grips with the way you support yourself financially and come to grips with your own sexuality. Those two things, priests, it's just the way they've been trained over all the years, got away from that. And if you don't have those two things, you can't understand the lay world. They're the major things I wanted to say. We've got to take a totally different approach to what the church has been doing since Constantine.
Thanks very much for that, John. Yeah, well, look, yeah, that's a challenge for us for the future, to see what we can do for the future, in fact, make it all real again. I don't know, is there anybody else would like to say anything? I mean, we can kind of formally conclude, but yeah, it's nice to see so many of you there. If you'd like to just kind of jump in and say a few words. Brian, shall we just say this is the formal end of the proceedings, but anybody like to jump in? Welcome. I'd like, happy to hear from you.
Yes, you can turn off the recording now, Stefan, and we'll continue for so long as people want to say something.
All right then.